All right, let's get right into it. When you really think about Uber's future, I mean, really look at it, it all comes down to a single massive question. What happens when the cars drive themselves? Today, we're going to try and answer that.
My name is Munffett. Now, before we dive in, let me just say, as always, that this analysis is for educational purposes only. It is absolutely not an investment recommendation. Any figures we discuss are just for illustration. They're not guarantees of future performance. Think of this as a strategic deep dive, not a tip.
So in our last discussion, we really established just how dominant Uber is in the global ride-sharing market. But we left one critical question unanswered, a real cliffhanger, if you will. What happens when the cars drive themselves? Well, today, we're tackling that question head-on.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We'll start by setting the stage, what I'm calling the great unknown. Then we'll map out the new competitive battlefield. From there, we'll look at the three main paths to autonomy that are emerging. Then it's all about Uber's strategic crossroads. We'll deconstruct the threat they're facing, and finally, we'll look at the road ahead.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, the great unknown. And I really want to stress this. We're not just talking about some new bell or whistle here. This isn't just a new feature. Autonomous technology, well, it represents a fundamental, ground-up paradigm shift for the entire industry.
Now, you'll remember this from our last conversation. Uber's strength is this incredibly powerful network flywheel. It's really the engine of their whole operation, this beautiful, self-reinforcing loop. But, and this is the crucial part, its entire foundation rests on one single component, a massive base of human drivers. Take that away, and well, that's where the whole structure starts to look a little shaky.
And that brings us squarely to the new battlefield. You see, the real threat to Uber, it's not another app that looks like Uber. It's not a clone. No, the threat comes from the companies that are trying to tear out that very foundation we just talked about and build something completely different in its place.
And what's so fascinating here is that there's no single right answer. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. What we're actually watching unfold is a battle of competing philosophies, a real clash of titans, each one bringing a completely different playbook for what the future of transportation should look like.
So, let's do just that. Let's deconstruct these strategies. As I see it, there are really three distinct paths to autonomy emerging, and each one is being championed by a major player. You've got Waymo, you've got Zoox, and of course you've got Tesla. And understanding how they differ, that is absolutely crucial to figuring out the real threat to Uber.
All right, first up, Waymo. Think of them as the brains of the operation. Their entire focus, almost to an obsessive degree, is on perfecting the technology, what they call the driver stack. They have zero interest in building their own ride-sharing app to compete with Uber. Instead, their plan is to license that technology out. They want to be the software inside everyone else's cars. So they expand very carefully, city by city, operating only within these very specific geo-fenced areas.
Yeah, this quote really nails it. Waymo. Their end goal is to be a tech company and license their technology. It's not about being the next Uber. It's about being the Intel inside for the entire autonomous vehicle industry. They want to own the high-margin scalable piece of the puzzle, the technology, and let their partners worry about the messy, capital-intensive work of fleet operations.
Okay, now on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Zoox. Their strategy couldn't be more different. We're talking pure end-to-end vertical integration. Their philosophy is that to deliver a truly seamless robotaxi experience, you have to own and control everything. So they're building a vehicle from the ground up, no steering wheel, no pedals. They'll own the fleet, operate the service, and manage the customer relationship through their own app. It's a much, much harder path, for sure. Far more expensive. But the bet is that by controlling the whole shebang, they'll create a far superior product.
And then there's Tesla, and they are playing an entirely different game altogether. You could almost call it a third way. Their strategy really rests on two key pillars. First, the incredible amount of data they gather from the millions of Teslas already driving around today. It's a massive advantage. And second, their business model is, well, it's pretty radical. They plan to let vehicle owners put their cars to work on a robotaxi network, sharing the revenue. It's a bold, some might even say audacious bet on a networked future. So let's just pause for a second and look at this all together. It really clarifies the battlefield. You've got Waymo, the tech licensor, playing the partnership game. You've got Zoox, the integrated operator, determined to do it all themselves. And you've got Tesla, the networked AI, trying to create a decentralized fleet out of customer-owned cars. I mean, these are three profoundly different visions for how this is all going to shake out. Okay, so that's the landscape. Now for the multi-billion-dollar question, where does this leave Uber? Where does the incumbent, the reigning champ, fit into all of this? Let's take a hard look at how their core advantage, that powerful flywheel, actually stands up to these new kinds of pressure.
And here it is again, that flywheel. You know, this virtuous cycle is what built their entire empire. More drivers mean lower wait times. Lower wait times bring in more riders. More riders mean higher earnings, which, you guessed it, attracts even more drivers. It's been the magic formula, the absolute key to their success.
But, and this is the big one, the entire left side of that flywheel, the entire supply side, is built on recruiting and retaining human drivers. So you have to ask yourself, what happens when you remove the human from that equation? Does this whole beautiful machine just grind to a halt? Does the advantage disappear?
Let's break down exactly how this model comes under pressure. First, you've got driver supply. Think about it. Uber's biggest competitive advantage, its moat, has always been its massive network of drivers. Well, in an AV world, that could become completely obsolete overnight. Second, unit economics. A competitor that owns its fleet, like a Zoox, could have a completely different cost structure, one that Uber might not be able to compete with. Third, liquidity. A new player wouldn't have to go through the pain of recruiting millions of drivers. They could just deploy a fleet of cars and achieve network density instantly. And finally, what about brand loyalty? If the service just becomes a commodity, a robotaxi is a robotaxi, do you still care if it says Uber on the side, or do you just choose whichever one is cheapest and arrives fastest?
Okay, so let's shift from the theoretical to the tactical. How would a competitor actually attack Uber? The key thing to realize is that they don't have to fight a global war. They don't need to compete everywhere. They can cause a ton of damage by exploiting one of Uber's key vulnerabilities.
And that vulnerability can be summed up in a single number, 17%. Now just think for a moment. For a global company like Uber, what could 17% possibly represent?
That is the percentage of Uber's entire US business that comes from just one city, New York City. And that right there, that highlights the vulnerability I'm talking about. See, even though Uber operates globally, its profits are incredibly concentrated in just a handful of very dense, very lucrative markets. And that right there is the playbook for a competitor. An AV company doesn't need to launch in 100 cities at once. If they can just nail the service, achieve that critical mass, and undercut Uber on price in a few of those key profit centers, let's say New York, London, San Francisco, they can inflict an absolutely disproportionate amount of damage to Uber's overall profitability.
But there is a huge counter-argument here, and frankly, it might be Uber's saving grace. The old playbook of burning billions of dollars of venture capital just to grab market share, those days are gone. We're in a completely different funding environment now. Investors demand a clear path to profitability. And that makes it a whole lot harder for a new competitor to wage a long, expensive, all-out war against an incumbent like Uber, which, by the way, is now actually profitable.
All right, that brings us to the final stretch here, the road ahead. We've looked at Uber's core strength, we've mapped out the new challengers and their different strategies, and we've pinpointed Uber's biggest vulnerabilities. So now, it's time to put it all together.
And you know, when you boil it all down, it really comes to this one central question. Is autonomy Uber's greatest threat? Is it a Trojan horse that's going to come in and just completely dismantle the empire that they spent a decade and billions of dollars to build? Or is it actually their ultimate opportunity? Is this their chance to leverage their massive global demand network and finally remove their single biggest cost, the driver, and in doing so capture an even bigger piece of the pie? That right there is the great unanswered question that will define Uber's future.